Although I have been a citizen of Japan for over half of my life, and consequently, my life as an American citizen occupies a smaller and smaller ratio of my existence, I still feel qualified to talk about racism, what it is, and why it exists. I was born and raised in Northwest Florida, which formed a cultural unit together with southern Alabama when I was a child, and which had rather less in common with the Florida Peninsula, an area of America that in the popular imagination is now represented by Disneyland and Miami Beach. When I was a child in the 1950s, segregation was everywhere, and racism so ingrained in the psyche of people living where I lived that people didn't even recognize it. It was somehow as natural as breathing. And though the Afro-American community was generally oppressed, people lived with a sense of security. No one locked their doors to either their cars or their houses. Crime in the Deep South was so low that people just didn't consider locking things up to be necessary. The official doctrine governing race relations was separate but equal, something which the Supreme Court of the United States would later rule to be an impossibility. And for the political system of the nation as a whole, they were right. However, on a micro level, the level of private individuals trying to make sense of things and yet continue to be decent human beings, it was not always an impossibility. With my parents, whom I lived every day of my childhood, being examples. My mother and father were the first wholesalers of flowers in Northwest Florida in the second half of the 1940s. At this time, there was an Afro-American woman who had a flower shop and who would buy flowers wholesale from my parents. It was a time in American history when not only schools but water fountains and toilets were separated by race. So my parents were strongly criticized by other people in the flower business for dealing with an Afro-American woman in the same manner as they would deal with white florists. My mother, being the brains behind the establishment and initial success of the business, was a very busy businesswoman during my earliest childhood. She often needed babysitters, and living literally on the border of a sizable Afro-American community, she generally hired Afro-American babysitters when she needed help. One of my earliest childhood memories was one of these Afro-American teenage babysitters, because not only was she kind to me, but was also, I thought, beautiful. Unfortunately, she married young, had many children, and died of cancer by the time I had finished my university education. There was also an Afro-American boy who lived in the house next to mine, who was my playmate until I was perhaps 8 or 9 years old. His parents had built the nicest house in the neighborhood, but before building it, they asked my mother if she had any objection to them doing so. She had absolutely no objection. My mother believed in segregated social relations, including family and circles of friends, but also believed in equality of opportunity, and being profoundly religious, believed in the right of all people to be treated with equal respect and dignity, both in word and in action. My father, though much less vocal, expressed with his actions a similar worldview and never showed any difficulty in associating with Afro-Americans to the limited extent it was possible at that time of American history. Nevertheless, the atmosphere of the times was stronger, even than the example of my parents, and I felt suddenly one day, after playing with my same-age Afro-American playmate, that I would somehow be spiritually and physically defiled if I continued to associate with him. From that point on, for a good 4 or 5 years of my life, I internalized racism to its worst extent within my little body. It was, in retrospect, a terrible period of my life, because the evil of racism left me with a bundle of other neuroses to deal with that it took many years to fully recover from, a period of time lasting well into my adulthood. However, very unexpectedly, a small miracle happened in 1963. George Wallace had become the governor of Alabama with the promise of preventing the integration of the University of Alabama. When things finally came to a head, he dramatically went on television one evening to rally public opinion behind him. This naturally included buying time on not only the two Mobile, Alabama television stations that also serviced our area of Northwest Florida, but included buying time on the local Northwest Florida television channel that serviced not only our community, but also adjacent parts of Alabama, including, of course, Mobile. Even though I was not then particularly interested in politics, coming home from school and having eaten supper, I had no choice but to listen to Governor Wallace make his speech. As the governor continued speaking, I realized that the tone of his voice and his body language somehow indicated that something was not right. Realizing something was wrong, I stopped listening to what he was saying and concentrated rather on how he was saying it, and saw something indeed was terribly wrong. It was then that I had a flash. I realized that he was verbalizing the evils of racism that had been controlling me for the previous 4 to 5 years of my life, and that if I let him reinforce with his words what was already inside of me and eating away at my soul, that it would destroy me. There then was a flash of self-recognition of how badly a continuation of my present condition would affect me. I saw that if I wanted to save myself as a moral human being that I could eventually learn to respect, I would have to reject not only what I was listening to, but also what was inside of me. And by a miracle of the Holy Spirit, I did. Of course, this deserves a qualification. All attempts at self-change are extremely difficult to accomplish. The source of my many, mostly well-hidden neuroses was destroyed in a flash. But the neuroses themselves would remain to torture me for many years to come. Some would take only 2 or 3 years to deal with, others 20 or 30. What I learned, though, was something more important than my own personal experience. I learned that evil is a real phenomenon and feeds on the human spirit. I learned that without self-knowledge, good cannot stand up to evil. What saved me is that I had already decided several years before that I would not reinforce the evil within me by blaming myself for my sins and the neuroses that I was unable to give up or to properly control. This gave me the ability, under this particular set of unexpected circumstances, to gain the necessary self-knowledge I needed to begin the slow and terribly hard process of trying to make myself into a better person. And it is, I must admit, even at the age of 72, a never-ending process. But the satisfaction found in making the effort continues to make it all worthwhile. So, to those of you who have taken the time to listen to me to the end, thank you. I sincerely hope that you will learn more quickly than I did how to best live your lives, and I hope your lives will carry you further in a positive direction, more than my life has carried me. So, by all means, have a good day, and all the best. Always, all the best.